Have you ever wanted something so badly that you started rushing through life, trying to grab it before God even placed it in your hands? That was me. I thought if I just pushed hard enough, searched long enough, and tried every possible way, I'd finally find the one. But instead of peace, I found emptiness. Instead of joy, I found exhaustion. Maybe that's why you clicked on this story. Because deep down, you know what it feels like to be running faster than your own heart can keep up. I was rushing through life. I was rushing through love. But then something happened that changed everything. And I want to tell you how God helped me when I stopped forcing and started listening. Let me take you back to where it all began. Have you ever wanted something so badly that it consumed your days, your nights, and even the quiet corners of your prayers? That was me. I was rushing through life, chasing after love, convinced that if I didn't find it soon, I'd be left behind. You know the kind of chasing I mean. The late nights with your phone glowing in the dark, your thumb swiping endlessly on dating apps, hoping that the next face, the next profile, the next quick laugh would finally be the answer. I told myself I was just putting myself out there. But deep down, it wasn't courage that kept me scrolling. It was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being forgotten, fear that everyone else would find their person, and I'd still be left standing alone at the edge of life's dance floor, waiting for a song that never started. The first crack came in the simplest of moments, sitting at a wedding reception, staring at the empty chair beside me. The music was soft, the lights twinkled above, couples laughed over clinking champagne glasses, and I smiled politely as if I was enjoying myself. But inside, I was crumbling. I thought of how many times I had imagined myself in that bride's place, walking down the aisle, having someone's eyes light up at the sight of me. Instead, I was sitting at table 7, alone, clutching a half-empty glass of water while my friends danced. I told myself I was happy for them, and in part, I was. But another part of me, the part that came alive when the slow song played and I had no hand to hold, whispered a different truth. I was tired. Tired of waiting, tired of hoping, tired of pretending. That night, as I walked back to my car under a sky filled with stars, I felt the loneliness wrap itself tighter than ever. I whispered into the dark, God, what's wrong with me? Why does it feel like you've forgotten me? Why does everyone else find love so easily, and I have to fight for scraps? The silence that followed wasn't new. I'd grown used to it. But that night it cut differently, like I was shouting into an endless cavern and hearing only the echo of my own desperation. Still, I didn't stop. I rushed harder. I signed up for more apps, went on more awkward coffee dates, sat through conversations that felt like interviews rather than connections. I laughed at jokes that didn't land, nodded at stories that didn't interest me, all while inside my heart screamed, "This isn't it." But I ignored the voice. I told myself I just needed to try harder, be more interesting, more patient, more something. Comparison became my constant companion. I'd see couples holding hands at church and feel like a child left out of a game. I'd scroll through social media, picture after picture of engagements, anniversaries, vacations, all with captions about answered prayers. And I wondered if my prayers had been misplaced in heaven's filing cabinet. Sometimes I even smiled through gritted teeth, whispering, "Congratulations," online, while secretly asking God why he seemed to be answering everyone else's requests except mine. There was one night in particular that broke me. I was lying in bed, scrolling through profiles at 2 a.m., when I realized I had been staring at faces for 2 hours straight, none of which stirred even the faintest spark in me. My room was dark. The only sound the hum of my ceiling fan, and my heart felt like a hollow drum. I threw the phone onto the nightstand and buried my face in the pillow. God, I groaned, I'm exhausted. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending I'm okay. If love is really from you, why do I feel like I have to chase it like this? That's when a verse surfaced in my memory, one I had heard countless times but never wanted to obey. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Be still? How could I? Stillness felt like surrender. Stillness felt like failure. Stillness meant watching everyone else run ahead while I stayed behind. I shook my head in frustration. No, God, I can't just sit here. If I don't keep trying, nothing will happen. But even as I resisted, the words pressed heavier into my spirit. Be still. Trust me. I wish I could say I listened right away, but the truth is, I didn't. I kept pushing, I kept rushing, and the more I rushed, the more fractured I became. Because here's the thing. When you try to fill your soul's longing with your own efforts, you eventually run out of fuel. And I was running on fumes. My friends noticed it too. One evening, over dinner, one of them leaned across the table and said, "You're always tired lately. Always distracted. It's like you're here, but you're not here." I forced a smile and brushed it off, but her words followed me home. Was that what I had become? A body present but a soul absent? I started to keep an invisible inventory of abandonment, moments that proved my fear was real. The unanswered text that stung, the date that ended with, "You're nice, but I don't think we're a match." The church potluck where no one asked if I was coming alone. The birthday I spent quietly, because no one special had called. Each moment added to the weight, brick by brick, until my heart felt like a wall built to keep others out, but really only kept me trapped inside. Then came the memory of a different time, a flashback to my childhood. I remembered watching my parents hold hands during long walks, remembered my father kissing my mother's forehead in the kitchen. Back then, I believed love was natural, simple, even ordinary. But growing older taught me to complicate it, to chase it, to rush it. The contrast between then and now made me ache even more. "God," I whispered again, staring at my ceiling. "I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be still. I don't even know if I can." And in the quiet, a whisper returned, not from my own thoughts, but deeper. "You're not missing out. You're being protected. You're not late. You're being prepared." I didn't believe it then. In fact, I almost laughed through my tears. Protected, prepared, it felt more like punished. But those words lodged themselves somewhere inside, like seeds I didn't know were being planted. Because what I didn't see then was that my rushing was leading me toward exhaustion, not fulfillment. What I didn't understand was that God's silence wasn't rejection, it was redirection. And that redirection was about to become very real. Because just when I thought love would never come unless I forced it, something unexpected was already on its way. And the moment it arrived, it unraveled everything I thought I knew about timing, love, and God's way of writing stories. The morning after that whisper came to me, "You're not missing out. You're being protected." I woke up feeling nothing. Not peace, not anger, just nothing. Have you ever been so emotionally exhausted that your heart goes into autopilot? That's where I was. I made coffee without tasting it, brushed my teeth without looking in the mirror, drove to work without remembering the route. I had become a ghost in my own life, haunting the spaces where joy used to live. My coworker noticed it first. "You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 20 minutes without typing anything," she said gently. I blinked, realizing she was right. The cursor had been blinking on the same cell, waiting for input I couldn't give because my mind was somewhere else, or maybe nowhere at all. "Just tired," I mumbled, the same excuse I'd been using for months. But we both knew it was more than that. That afternoon, something strange happened. I was walking past the break room when I overheard two women talking about their weekend plans with their husbands. Normally, this would have sent me spiraling into comparison. But this time, I felt nothing. And somehow, that scared me more than the pain ever had. Because at least pain meant I was still alive. This numbness, it felt like spiritual death. When you stop feeling pain, it doesn't mean you're healed. Sometimes it means your heart has given up trying to be heard. I started tracing back through my wounds that night, like an archaeologist carefully brushing dust off ancient artifacts. When did this begin? Not the rushing for love, but the deeper wound underneath it all. The first memory surfaced uninvited. I was 7 years old, standing in my grandmother's kitchen. My parents were arguing in the next room. Again, I remember pressing my small hands against my ears, humming hymns to drown out their voices. My grandmother found me there, tears streaming down my face, and she held me close. "Sometimes," she whispered, "love looks different than we expect." I didn't understand then. But now, 20 years later, I wondered if that was the moment I started believing love had to be fought for, earned, chased. The wounds we carry as adults often have roots in moments we've forgotten as children. Another memory, high school. The boy I thought was the one, you know how dramatic teenage love feels, told me he was taking someone else to prom. I smiled and said it was fine, but I spent that night writing in my journal. Maybe I'm just not the kind of girl people choose. Those words. I'd written them at 16, but I was still living them at 27. Then college. My roommate got engaged junior year. I helped her plan everything. The proposal spot, the ring, the announcement. I was genuinely happy for her. But the night she showed me the ring, I went to the campus chapel and sat in the back row, asking God why he kept making me the supporting character in everyone else's love story. The silence in that chapel felt heavier than the stone walls around me. These weren't just memories anymore. They were archaeological layers of abandonment, each one building on the last, creating a fortress around my heart that I didn't even realize I had constructed. My mother called that week. "How are you, sweetheart?" she asked, and something in her voice made me wonder if she knew. Mothers always know, don't they? "I'm fine, Mom," I lied, but my voice cracked on the word fine. There was a pause, and then she said something that stopped me cold. "You know, I rushed into love with your father. I was so afraid of being alone that I didn't wait to hear what God was saying." I had never heard her say this before. My parents had been married 30 years. "What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "I mean," she continued softly, "that sometimes our biggest blessings come wrapped in waiting. Your father and I worked out, thank God, but I spent the first 10 years of our marriage trying to force something that needed time to grow naturally. I was so busy rushing that I almost missed the beauty of becoming." After we hung up, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, watching families come and go. A couple walked by, arguing about groceries. Another couple sat on the bench, scrolling through their separate phones in silence. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the love I was chasing, the Instagram-perfect movie-ending kind, wasn't even real. Maybe everyone was struggling. Maybe everyone was pretending. Maybe the void I felt wasn't unique to me, but was the human condition, trying to fill infinite longing with finite things. That night, I couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m., I found myself in my closet, pulling out an old box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters, photos, birthday cards, artifacts from a version of me who believed love would come naturally. There was a photo from my college graduation, my smile wide and genuine, my eyes bright with possibility. I traced my finger over that girl's face and whispered, "What happened to you?" But even as I asked, I knew. Life happened. Disappointment happened. Watching everyone else get chosen happened. And somewhere along the way, I had started believing that God's love for me was conditional on finding human love, as if his approval rating of my life depended on my relationship status. The divine interruption came 3 days later, completely unexpected. I was at the grocery store, yes, the mundane grocery store, when I heard a child crying in the cereal aisle. His mother was trying to calm him, clearly exhausted, and without thinking, I walked over and made a silly face at the boy. He stopped crying and giggled. His mother looked at me with such gratitude, and she said, "Thank you. Sometimes we just need someone to see us in our mess. Sometimes we just need someone to see us in our mess." Those words followed me home. They followed me to bed. They followed me into my prayers. Because wasn't that what I had been begging God for? Not perfection, but presence. Not performance, but just being seen. I opened my Bible that night to a random page, something I rarely did, and my eyes fell on Isaiah 43:4. "Since you are precious and honored in my sight, and because I love you." The words blurred through my tears. Precious, honored, loved, present tense, not future conditional, not will be when you find someone. But right now, in my mess, in my numbness, in my archaeological dig through old wounds, the excavation wasn't finished. In fact, it was just beginning. But something shifted that night. The wounds were still there, but now they weren't hidden. They were exposed to air, to light, to the possibility of healing. I thought about generational patterns, my grandmother's loneliness, my mother's rushing, my own desperate grasping. 3 generations of women afraid of being alone, all of us missing the truth that we never were. God had been there in my grandmother's kitchen. He had been there in my mother's early marriage struggles. He was here now in my 3 a.m. tears and grocery store encounters. The next morning, something strange happened. I woke up and felt something. Not joy exactly, but not numbness either. It was like the first sensation returning to a limb that had fallen asleep, uncomfortable, tingling, but proof of life returning. I made coffee and actually tasted it, looked in the mirror and saw myself, really saw myself, for the first time in months. The woman looking back was tired, yes, wounded, absolutely. But she was also still here, still fighting, still becoming. My phone buzzed with another dating app notification. This time, instead of rushing to check it or throwing my phone across the room, I simply turned it off. Not forever, but for now. Because I was beginning to understand that before I could let someone else love me, I needed to excavate why I had stopped believing I was worth loving in the first place. The archaeology of wounds is painful work. Each layer you uncover reveals another hurt you had buried, another lie you had believed, another wall you had built. But it also reveals something else, the places where God's grace had been holding you together when you thought you were falling apart. That week, I started a journal. Not a Dear Diary kind of thing, but an excavation record. I wrote down every wound I could remember, every moment of feeling unchosen, every time I had believed I wasn't enough. The list was longer than I expected. But next to each wound, I started writing something else, a moment where God had shown up, even when I hadn't recognized it at the time. The grandmother who held me during my parents' fights, that was God's embrace. The friend who called right when I was spiraling, that was God's voice. The stranger in the grocery store who needed exactly what I could give, that was God's reminder that I had purpose beyond my relationship status. I wasn't ready to surrender yet. The resistance was still strong, my grip on control still white-knuckled, but the sacred interruptions were becoming harder to ignore. They came in unexpected moments, a song on the radio with perfect timing, a Bible verse on a random billboard, a sunset that stopped me in my tracks and made me whisper, "Thank you," before I could stop myself. One evening, I was walking through my neighborhood when I passed an elderly couple sitting on their porch. They were holding hands, not talking, just being together in comfortable silence. The wife noticed me and smiled. 53 years, she said, as if she could read the question in my eyes. And you know what? The first 40 were the hardest. They both laughed, and she continued. We spent so many years trying to be what we thought the other person wanted. It wasn't until we stopped performing and started just being that love finally had room to breathe. Love finally had room to breathe. I thought about those words all the way home. How much of my rushing was actually suffocating the very thing I claimed to want? How much of my forcing was preventing love from growing naturally, organically, divinely? That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I turned off all my devices, lit a candle, and sat in complete silence. No scrolling, no swiping, no searching. Just sitting with myself, with my wounds, with my archaeology project of a heart, and in that silence, I heard it again, clearer this time. You're not missing out. You're being protected. You're not late. You're being prepared. But prepared for what? Protected from what? I wanted to demand answers, to rush God's revelation the same way I'd been rushing everything else. But something in the silence warned me. Don't rush this too. Some truths can only be revealed in their time. Some healing can only happen layer by layer. The tears came then, not the desperate panicked tears of recent months, but something deeper. These were tears of recognition, of finally seeing the pattern, of understanding that my rushing wasn't just about finding love, it was about running from the pain of feeling unloved, and no amount of swiping, searching, or forcing could heal what only stillness and surrender could reach. I wasn't there yet, at surrender, but I was closer. The excavation had begun. The wounds were being cataloged. The divine interruptions were being noticed. And somewhere in the mess of it all, hope, fragile and tentative, was beginning to take root. Because sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with finding someone else, but with God helping you find yourself again. And that discovery? It was about to change everything. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Isn't it strange how our most sacred moments often arrive dressed in everyday clothes? I was washing dishes, such a mundane task, when my phone rang. It was my best friend, Sarah, and she was crying. Happy tears. "He proposed," she screamed, and I heard the joy spilling out of her like champagne from a shaken bottle. "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. I really did. But as I stood there with soap suds on my hands and her joy in my ears, something inside me finally snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a rubber band pulled too tight for too long. After I hung up, I threw the dish towel on the counter and walked straight to my bedroom. I locked the door, fell to my knees, and did something I had never done before. I got brutally honest with God. "I'm done pretending," I said out loud, my voice shaking. "I'm done acting like I'm okay with this. I'm not okay with this." The words started pouring out, years of bottled frustration finally uncorked. "You say you love me, but where's the evidence? You say you have plans for me, but all I see are dead ends. You say you're preparing me, but for what? To be everyone's bridesmaid? To be the perpetual third wheel? To watch everyone else get their prayers answered while mine get filed under maybe later?" I was Jacob wrestling with the angel, except I was in yoga pants and my battlefield was a suburban bedroom. But the fight was just as real, just as raw, just as necessary. "I've done everything right," I continued, my voice rising. "I've prayed, I've waited, I've served in church, I've kept myself pure, I've been patient, I've been faithful. And what do I get? Silence, empty chairs, unused plus ones, pity looks from married friends. The anger surprised me. I had been sad for so long that I forgot there was rage underneath it all. Rage at God, rage at myself, rage at the unfairness of it all. Good Christian girls aren't supposed to rage at God, but there I was, letting years of religious politeness burn away in the fire of my honesty. "Sarah's not even a believer," I shouted at the ceiling. "She doesn't pray. She doesn't seek you. She slept around in college. And she gets the ring. She gets the love story. How is that fair? How is that just? How is that a God who sees me?" The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. I sat there on my carpet, breathing hard, waiting for lightning to strike or the earth to swallow me whole. But nothing happened. Just silence. Again. And then, in the smallest whisper, softer than breath, "Finally. Finally, you're being real with me." I froze. "What?" I whispered back. "You've been performing for me the same way you've been performing for everyone else, but I don't want your performance. I want your truth, even when it's ugly, even when it's angry, even when it's wrestling." The tears came then, different from before. These were tears of relief, of being seen in my ugliest moment and not being rejected. "But I don't understand," I sobbed. "Why does everyone else get love except me? What's wrong with me? What makes you think love is something you get? What if love is something you already are?" The words didn't make sense, not yet, but they lodged themselves in my chest like seeds waiting for the right season to grow. I stayed on that floor for an hour, maybe two, alternating between tears and silence, between questions and surrender. Finally, exhausted, I got up and walked to my bathroom. The mirror showed me exactly what I expected: puffy eyes, blotchy skin, hair a mess. But then I looked closer, really looked, past the surface, past the exhaustion, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months: fight. I was still fighting, still wrestling, still refusing to give up, and maybe that was its own kind of faith. "Okay," I said to my reflection, to God, to myself. "I don't understand. I'm still angry, I'm still hurt, but I'm listening, really listening this time. Show me what I'm not seeing." The answer didn't come immediately. But over the next few days, things started shifting. Not externally, my circumstances were exactly the same. But internally, something was moving. I started noticing things, like how I had been praying for a love that would complete me, as if I was incomplete. How I had been begging for someone to choose me, as if God hadn't already chosen me. How I had been racing toward a finish line that didn't exist, Because love isn't a destination you arrive at, but a journey you walk. One morning, I was reading Psalms when a verse jumped off the page. He rescued me because he delighted in me. Psalm 18:19. Delighted, not tolerated, not accepted. Delighted, present tense. I'd been so focused on finding someone who would delight in me that I had missed the reality that the creator of the universe already did. I'd been begging for human love while drowning in divine love I couldn't even see. But seeing it and feeling it were two different things. The wound was so deep, the pattern so entrenched, that knowledge alone wasn't enough to heal it. I needed something more. I needed an encounter. It came through the most unexpected source, a 5-year-old girl at church. I was sitting alone, as usual, when she climbed into my lap without invitation. "Why are you sad?" she asked with the brutal honesty only children possess. "I'm not sad," I lied. She studied my face with those clear eyes that haven't learned to look away from pain. "Yes, you are. But it's okay. Jesus was sad sometimes too." Then she hugged me, her small arms barely reaching around me, and whispered, "You're loved already, you know. You're loved already, you know." From the mouth of a babe, God using a 5-year-old to deliver the message I couldn't receive any other way. I held that little girl and cried right there in the pew, not caring who saw. That afternoon, I went home and did something radical. I deleted all my dating apps, not in anger this time, but in surrender. "Okay, God," I said, "I'm done forcing. I'm done rushing. I'm done trying to make something happen. If you have someone for me, you'll have to bring them. And if you don't, help me be okay with that. Help me see that your love is enough." The words felt like death and resurrection all at once. Death to control, resurrection to trust. I wish I could say everything immediately got easier. It didn't. The next few weeks were brutal. Without the distraction of swiping and searching, I had to actually sit with my loneliness. I had to feel it, acknowledge it, let it teach me what it had been trying to say all along. And what I discovered surprised me. My loneliness wasn't really about being single. It was about feeling unseen, unknown, unchosen with a capital C. But those were all lies. I was seen by the God who noticed every tear. I was known by the one who knew me before I was formed. I was chosen, marked and sealed before the foundation of the world. The sacred confrontation had done its work. I had wrestled with God, and like Jacob, I walked away limping but blessed. The limp was my surrender to his timing. The blessing was finally seeing that I had been held all along. One evening, I was journaling when I wrote something that surprised me. What if my singleness isn't a punishment, but a protection? What if God is guarding my heart so fiercely because he knows exactly what kind of love I need, and he refuses to let me settle for less? The thought revolutionized everything. What if all this waiting wasn't God withholding, but God preparing? What if the delay wasn't denial, but divine timing? I started looking back over my dating history with new eyes. Every relationship that didn't work out, every almost but not quite, every rejection, what if they were all acts of mercy? What if God had been protecting me from connections that would have damaged me, limited me, pulled me away from his best? The guy who ghosted me after 3 dates, I later found out he was married, the one who seemed perfect but always made me feel small, he ended up being emotionally abusive to his next girlfriend. The one I thought was the one. He didn't believe in God, and I had been willing to compromise everything for him. Protection. It had all been protection. "Thank you," I whispered into the darkness of my room. "Thank you for every number. Thank you for every closed door. Thank you for loving me enough to guard me from my own desperation." The sacred confrontation was coming to an end, but its effects would ripple through everything that came next. Because once you've wrestled with God and lived to tell about it, once you've been honest enough to rage and humble enough to listen, once you've died to control and been resurrected to trust, you're never the same. I was still single. My circumstances hadn't changed, but I had. And that change was about to unlock something I never expected, the ability to see God's fingerprints everywhere, even in the places I thought he had abandoned. 3 months passed after my sacred confrontation. 3 months of learning to be still, of sitting with myself without running to an app for validation, of discovering who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone's girlfriend. And that's when the archaeology really began. Not the excavation of wounds this time, but the discovery of God's fingerprints in places I had never thought to look. It started with a photo album my mom brought over. "I was cleaning out the attic," she said, "and I thought you might want to see these." Old pictures from my childhood, my teenage years, early college. But as I flipped through them, I saw something I had never noticed before. In every single photo where I thought I had been alone, there was evidence of presence. The birthday party where no boys showed up, but 5 girls who became lifelong friends were there. The prom I went to, alone, but surrounded by a group who made me laugh until my sides hurt. The college graduation where I walked without a boyfriend, but with parents who cried with pride. I had been so focused on what was missing that I had completely missed what was there. "Mom," I said suddenly, "remember when I was 16 and crushed about not having a boyfriend for Valentine's Day?" She smiled. "You were so upset. You locked yourself in your room." "But then Dad slipped that card under my door," I continued, the memory crystallizing. "The one that said, 'To my beautiful daughter, my forever Valentine.'" "He drove to 3 different stores to find the perfect one," she said softly. "He wanted you to know you were loved, even if you couldn't see it. He wanted me to know I was loved, even if I couldn't see it. The divine archaeology was revealing layer after layer of love I had been blind to." I went home that night and pulled out my journal from the past year. But this time, I read it differently. Instead of seeing the pain, I started marking the provisions. The friend who called right when I was spiraling. The sermon that spoke directly to my situation. The stranger who paid for my coffee on a particularly hard day. The child who hugged me in church. God had been there, in every moment, speaking through people, circumstances, coincidences that weren't coincidences at all. I had just been too focused on what I thought His love should look like to recognize how it was actually showing up. The next revelation came through a conversation with my grandmother. She was 83 now, hands weathered by time, eyes soft with wisdom. "Tell me about Grandpa," I said one afternoon as we sat on her porch. "How did you know he was the one?" She laughed to sound like wind chimes. "Oh, honey, I didn't. Not at first. In fact, I was convinced God had forgotten about me." My eyes widened. This was new information. "I was 28, she continued, which back then meant I was practically a spinster. I watched all my friends get married at 18, 19. By 25, I had given up." 28. Exactly my age now. "But Grandma, you and Grandpa had such a beautiful love story," I protested. "Yes," she nodded. "But it didn't start beautiful. It started with me angry at God, convinced He had passed me over. I spent 3 years bitter, pushing away every opportunity because I was so focused on what I didn't have." "What changed?" I asked, leaning forward. "I finally surrendered," she said simply. "Really surrendered. Not the fake kind where you say you trust God but keep one hand on the wheel. The real kind where you open your hands and say, 'Whatever you want, Lord, even if it's nothing.' And then Grandpa showed up." She laughed again. "No, honey. First, God showed up. In my surrender, I finally saw Him clearly. I spent a year falling in love with Jesus, discovering who I was in Him, learning to be whole without another person. And then, when I wasn't looking, wasn't searching, wasn't desperate, that's when your grandfather walked into my church. When I wasn't looking, wasn't searching, wasn't desperate. But here's the secret," she continued, taking my hand in her weathered one. "If your grandfather had come earlier, when I was still desperate, still incomplete, still trying to fill a God-shaped hole with a man-shaped solution, it would have destroyed us both. The waiting wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The waiting wasn't punishment, it was preparation." I drove home in silence, her words echoing in my mind. How many of my prayers for love had really been prayers to avoid dealing with myself? How many times had I asked God for someone to complete me, instead of asking Him to make me complete? That night, I had a dream. I was standing in a garden, and Jesus was there, planting seeds. "What are you planting?" I asked Him. "Your story," He replied, not looking up from His work. "Every tear you've cried, I've collected. Every prayer you've prayed, I've heard. Every lonely night, I've been preparing soil. You think nothing is happening because you can't see above ground. But underneath, roots are growing deep. I woke up with tears on my face, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding that my story wasn't on pause, it was in process. The divine archaeology continued over the next weeks. I started seeing patterns I had missed before. Every relationship that didn't work out had taught me something essential. The one who was emotionally unavailable taught me to recognize my worth. The one who didn't share my faith taught me what was non-negotiable. The one who seemed perfect but felt wrong taught me to trust my intuition. They weren't failed relationships, they were successful lessons. I found an old prayer journal from 5 years ago. In it, I had written a list of what I wanted in a spouse. As I read it now, I cringed. It was so surface level. Tall, handsome, successful, funny. Nothing about character, faith, kindness, or how he would help me become who God created me to be. I had been praying for an accessory to my life, not a partner in purpose. God, I whispered, thank you for not answering that prayer. Thank you for knowing better than I did what I actually needed. The archaeology was revealing something profound. Every unanswered prayer had been an act of mercy. Every closed door had been protection. Every delay had been development. One Sunday, Pastor said something that pierced straight through me. Some of you are angry at God for not giving you what you want. But what if He's waiting for you to become who you need to be to steward what He wants to give you? What if He's waiting for you to become who you need to be? I thought about all the ways I had changed in these months of waiting. I had developed patience through frustration. I had learned to be alone through loneliness. I had discovered my identity apart from a relationship through singleness. I had found my voice through silence. The very thing I thought was breaking me had actually been making me. I started a new practice. Every morning, instead of waking up and immediately feeling the weight of what was missing, I would list 5 fingerprints of God from the day before. Small things, big things, hidden things, obvious things. The sunrise that took my breath away. The text from a friend at the exact right moment. The song on the radio that spoke to my situation. The parking spot that opened up when I was running late. The peace that came during prayer. Within a week, I had filled an entire notebook. Evidence of a God who was intimately involved in every detail of my life, even when, especially when, I couldn't feel Him. One afternoon, I was walking through the park when I saw an elderly man feeding birds. He was alone, but he was smiling, completely content in the moment. "Beautiful day," he said as I passed. "It is," I agreed, and meant it. "You know," he continued as if we were old friends, "I spent 40 years of my life rushing through days like this, always focused on what was next, what was missing. Then my wife died, and I realized I had missed thousands of beautiful todays waiting for a perfect tomorrow. I had missed thousands of beautiful todays waiting for a perfect tomorrow. I sat down on the bench next to him. "How do you not get lonely?" I asked. He smiled. "Who says I don't?" But loneliness isn't the enemy we think it is. It's just another emotion, like joy or sadness. It comes, it teaches us something, and it goes. The problem is when we let it become our identity instead of just an experience. The problem is when we let it become our identity instead of just an experience. We sat in comfortable silence watching the birds, and I realized something. I wasn't rushing anymore. For the first time in years, I was just present. Not scrolling through my phone, not planning my next move, not comparing my life to anyone else's, just sitting on a bench, feeding birds with a stranger, finding God in the ordinary. That night, I looked in the mirror and saw someone different. Not physically, I was the same person. But internally, something had shifted. The desperation was gone. The frantic energy had settled. The constant ache had transformed into something else, not gone, but changed. It had become hunger for God Himself, not just His gifts. "I see what you did," I said to my reflection, to God, to whoever was listening. "You let me exhaust myself trying to fill the void with the wrong things so I would finally be ready for the right thing. You let me break so you could rebuild me correctly." The divine archaeology had revealed the truth. I had never been abandoned. I had never been forgotten. I had never been unloved. I had just been looking for God in the wrong places, with the wrong eyes, at the wrong time. But now I could see him everywhere, in the ordinary, in the waiting, in the silence, in the solitude. And seeing him there changed everything about how I saw myself. I pulled out a fresh journal and wrote at the top, "Things I'm grateful I didn't get." The list was long. The relationship at 22 that would have derailed my career. The guy at 25 who would have pulled me from my faith. The marriage at 26 that would have been built on desperation rather than love. Thank you for the numbers. Thank you for the not yets. Thank you for the nevers. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah, my recently engaged friend. "Hey, I need to ask you something. Will you be my maid of honor?" A few months ago, this would have devastated me. Another wedding, another reminder, another supporting role. But now I smiled genuinely and typed back, "I would be honored." And I meant it. Because I was finally understanding that my story wasn't less beautiful, because it looked different. It wasn't on hold because I was single. It wasn't incomplete because I was alone. My story was being written by the author of life himself, and he didn't do rough drafts. Every chapter, even the painful ones, had purpose. The divine archaeology had done its work. I'd traced God's fingerprints through every season, every sadness, every silence. And what I found wasn't abandonment. It was accompaniment, not absence, but presence. Not rejection, but redirection. I was ready now. Not ready for a relationship that may or may not come, but ready for life. Ready for purpose. Ready to stop waiting for my story to begin and realize it had been happening all along. The excavation was complete. The evidence was overwhelming. I had been loved completely and perfectly every single day of my life. I just had to have my heart broken enough to finally see it. And now that I could see it, everything was about to change. Not my circumstances. Those might stay exactly the same, but my perspective, my purpose, my peace, those were about to be revolutionized. Because when you finally see that you've been held all along, you stop thrashing against the arms that carry you and start resting in them instead. And that rest? That's where the real story begins. The morning I woke up different, it was raining. Not the dramatic, stormy kind of rain you'd expect for a life-changing moment, but the gentle, steady kind that waters gardens and washes the world clean. I lay in bed listening to it, and for the first time in years, my first thought wasn't about what I lacked. It was about what I had. I made coffee, slowly, deliberately, like a meditation. Steam rose from the cup like incense, and I thought about Moses encountering God in the ordinary burning bush. How many burning bushes had I missed because I was too busy looking for lightning? My phone sat silent on the counter. No notifications from dating apps. I had deleted them months ago. No desperate late-night texts to ex-almosts. I had deleted those numbers too. Just silence. But it wasn't empty silence anymore. It was full silence, pregnant with possibility. I had a strange urge to go to the farmer's market, not to meet someone. That old motivation was gone. But just to go. To be among the living. To touch tomatoes and smell basil and remember that life was happening all around me, with or without a ring on my finger. The market was crowded, families and couples and singles, all weaving between vendors. But for once, I didn't categorize people by their relationship status. I just saw humans, all of us hungry for something, all of us carrying invisible weights, all of us more alike than different. I was examining peaches when I heard crying. A young woman, maybe 22, was sitting on a bench, trying to hide her tears behind sunglasses. The old me would have walked by, too consumed with my own pain to notice anyone else's, but the new me, the one who had been excavated and reconstructed, sat down beside her. "Rough morning?" I asked gently. She laughed through her tears. "Rough year. My boyfriend just broke up with me, through text, after 3 years. She showed me her phone and I saw the words that had shattered her. I don't think this is working anymore." I could have given her platitudes, told her she was better off without him, that someone better would come along. All the things people had told me that never helped. Instead, I said, "That really sucks. And it's okay to feel like it sucks." She looked at me, surprised. "Everyone keeps telling me to be positive. that everything happens for a reason. Maybe it does, I said, but right now it just hurts. And that's okay. You're allowed to grieve what you thought your story would be. You're allowed to grieve what you thought your story would be. We sat there for an hour. I told her my story. The rushing, the apps, the desperation, the breaking, the finding. Not to minimize her pain, but to let her know she wasn't alone in it. That someone else had walked this valley and survived. How did you get through it? She asked. I stopped trying to get through it, I said honestly. I started letting it get through me. The pain, the loneliness, the questions, I let them do their work. And somewhere in that surrender, I found God waiting. She cried harder, but it was a different kind of crying, the kind that cleanses rather than just releases. Before she left, she hugged me. Thank you for not trying to fix me, she whispered. Thank you for not trying to fix me. As I walked home with my bag of peaches, I realized something profound. I had become a wounded healer. My pain hadn't been wasted. It had been transformed into the exact kind of compassion someone else needed. That afternoon, I sat down to write. Not in my journal this time, but a letter. To my future self, or maybe to my future husband if he existed, or maybe just to God. I wasn't sure. I just knew I needed to document this moment. Dear whoever reads this, I began. Today I am 28 years old, single, and more whole than I have ever been. I'm not waiting anymore. Not because I've given up hope, but because I've realized that waiting implies my life is on pause. And it's not. It's happening. Right now. In this moment. I spent so many years believing that love was something I had to earn, chase, or convince someone to give me. But I know now that love is what I am. It's how I was designed. It's the breath of God in my lungs and the purpose in my bones. If you're my future husband reading this, know that I'm not desperate for you anymore. I'm not incomplete without you. I'm not rehearsing our meeting or planning our wedding or naming our children. I'm living. Fully. Presently. Joyfully. And if God brings us together, it won't be because I need you to complete me. It will be because two whole people make a stronger ministry than two halves make a whole. If you're my future self reading this, remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to finally be free. Remember that you were loved before anyone chose you. Remember that your worth was never in question, only your vision. And if you're reading this, God, though I know you already know, thank you. Thank you for loving me enough to let me exhaust myself. Thank you for the closed doors that felt like rejection, but were really redirection. Thank you for the silence that taught me to listen. Thank you for the loneliness that taught me to seek you. Thank you for breaking me so thoroughly that you could rebuild me correctly. I sealed the letter and put it in my Bible, right next to Psalm 37, verse 4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. I used to read that verse as a transaction. If I delight in God, He'll give me a husband. But now I understood it differently. When you truly delight in God, He becomes the desire of your heart. Everything else is just overflow. The next Sunday at church, something unusual happened. Pastor asked if anyone had a testimony to share. Without thinking, I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my voice was steady. I want to tell you about a love story, I began. But it's not the kind you're expecting. It's not about meeting someone at a coffee shop or getting engaged on a mountaintop. It's about how God loved me back to life when I thought I was dying of loneliness. The sanctuary was silent. I could feel everyone listening, really listening. I spent years angry at God for not giving me what everyone else seemed to have. I thought He had forgotten me, overlooked me, put my file in the wrong cabinet. A few people laughed knowingly. They had been there too. But here's what I learned, I continued, my voice getting stronger. God wasn't withholding love from me. He was withholding counterfeits. He wasn't making me wait to be cruel. He was making me wait to be kind. He knew that what I was desperately seeking in another person could only be found in Him. I looked around the room and saw tears on faces of singles, on faces of marrieds, because everyone knew what it was like to look for God in the wrong places. I'm still single, I said, and I actually smiled. I don't know if that will change, but I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not on pause. I'm not incomplete. I'm a whole person, loved by a whole God, living a whole life. And that's enough. Actually, it's more than enough. It's abundant. When I sat down, the woman next to me, married for 15 years, grabbed my hand. I needed to hear that, she whispered. I've been looking to my husband to fill voids only God can fill. Thank you for reminding me. Thank you for reminding me. After church, a line of people wanted to talk. Singles who felt seen, marrieds who felt convicted, parents who wanted to share my story with their daughters. I had become, without meaning to, a voice for the overlooked, a prophet for the waiting, a witness to the faithfulness of God in the wilderness. That week, I got a call from Pastor. I want to talk to you about something, he said. We're starting a ministry for singles, not a dating service, a real ministry, for people to learn to be whole in Christ whether they marry or not. Would you consider leading it? Leading it. Me. The girl who just months ago was swiping desperately through faces at 3 a.m. I don't know if I'm qualified, I said honestly. That's exactly why you're qualified, he replied. You've been in the valley. You know the terrain. You can guide others through it. You can guide others through it. I said yes, not because I had arrived somewhere, but because I was still on the journey and could walk alongside others on theirs. The first meeting of Whole in Him, that's what we called it, had 3 people. 3 nervous, beautiful, broken people who thought something was wrong with them because they were single. By the 3rd month, we had 30. By the 6th month, 60. But it wasn't about numbers. It was about transformation, watching people discover what I had discovered, that singleness wasn't a disease to be cured, but a season to be stewarded. That wholeness wasn't found in another person, but in the person of Christ. That waiting wasn't wasted when you were waiting on God. One evening, after a particularly powerful meeting where a 40-year-old woman shared how she had finally stopped believing the lie that she was left over, I was cleaning up the chairs when I found a note someone had left. Thank you for showing me that I'm not behind. I'm not broken. I'm not forgotten. I'm just on a different timeline, and God's timing is perfect. You saved my life tonight. You saved my life tonight. I sat in that empty room and wept. Not tears of sadness, but tears of awe. God had taken my deepest pain and turned it into my greatest purpose. He had used my breakdown to build a ministry. He had transformed my test into a testimony. 6 months into leading the ministry, something else shifted. I realized I hadn't thought about finding the one in weeks, not because I had given up, but because I was so fulfilled in what God was doing through me that I forgot to be anxious about what He wasn't doing for me. I was at a coffee shop preparing for our next meeting when an older woman approached me. She had been watching me work, watching me smile at my notes, watching me highlight scripture. You're glowing, she said simply. Excuse me. You're glowing, with purpose, with joy, with life. I've been watching you for 20 minutes and you haven't looked at your phone once. You're just present, content, alive, present, content, alive. Can I tell you something? She continued. I was married for 40 years, widowed now for 5, and I spent most of those married years waiting for my husband to make me as happy as you look right now. But happiness like that, it doesn't come from another person. It comes from knowing who you are and whose you are. It comes from knowing who you are and whose you are. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked, and I saw what that woman saw. I was glowing. Not with the artificial shine of new love or the temporary high of attention, but with something deeper, something unshakable, something eternal. I was glowing with the radiance of someone who had been in the presence of God and lived to tell about it. My phone rang. It was my mom. Honey, I just wanted to tell you something, she said. I've watched you these past months and I've never seen you more beautiful. Not because anything external has changed, but because you've finally become who God created you to be. You've finally become who God created you to be. Thanks, Mom, I said, and meant it. And honey, she added, I want you to know something else. Whether God brings you someone or not, you are complete. You are enough. You are loved. And watching you discover that has been one of the greatest joys of my life. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment. But it wasn't lonely silence anymore. It was sacred silence, the kind where you can hear God breathing, the kind where you know you're not alone even when you're by yourself. I thought about the girl I had been a year ago, desperate, anxious, performing, rushing. I barely recognized her, or maybe I recognized her completely. I just wasn't her anymore. I had emerged, not into a relationship, not into marriage, but into myself, into purpose, into wholeness, into a love story with the author of love himself. And that emergence had changed everything. I pulled out my journal one last time and wrote, "Dear God, I thought this story would end with me finding someone, with a ring, with a wedding, with my happily ever after, but you had a better ending in mind. This story ends with me finding you, really finding you, not the God I thought you were, the cosmic matchmaker, the divine withholder, the distant judge, but the real you, the God who collects tears, the God who delights in me, the God who was writing a love story all along, just not the one I expected. Thank you for loving me enough to disappoint me. Thank you for caring more about my character than my comfort. Thank you for being silent when I wanted answers and present when I needed comfort. I don't know what tomorrow holds. I don't know if love will come in the form of a person or if my love story will always be just you and me. But I know this, I am loved, I am whole, I am free. And that's not a consolation prize, that's the prize. Forever grateful. Your daughter who finally understands." I closed the journal and stood up. Tomorrow I would wake up and live my life. I would serve in ministry. I would love my friends. I would embrace my family. I would pursue my purpose. And if love came, beautiful. And if it didn't, still beautiful. Because I had learned the secret, the love you're looking for, you're already living in it. You just have to stop running long enough to feel it. The rain had stopped. The sun was setting. And somewhere in the distance, I heard church bells ringing. Not for a wedding, just marking time. Marking another day of being alive. Another day of being loved. Another day of being held by hands that never let go. I smiled, not the forced smile of someone pretending to be okay, but the real smile of someone who actually was. Because this is what sacred emergence looks like. Not a grand entrance into someone else's life, but a quiet arrival into your own, not finding someone to complete you, but discovering you were never incomplete. Not getting the love you wanted, but receiving the love you needed. And that love, it had been there all along. Waiting for me to stop rushing long enough to receive it. Waiting for me to stop performing long enough to rest in it. Waiting for me to stop searching long enough to be found by it. And now that I had been found, now that I had emerged, now that I was whole, the real story could begin.